All right, here we go. Thank you all for joining us. I am very happy to be joined by Rahul Rosdan today, who is one of our premier solution consultants. Rahul, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hey, hi everyone, this is Rahul. Can you hear me right now? Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Thanks, Teresa. So here in ServiceNow, I look after the risk and ESG business, and today we'll be talking about internal controls, predominantly on the financial space, and how a framework like SOX can help streamline that entire process for you guys. So with that, over to you, Teresa.
Wonderful. So we're glad to have everybody here. We've got the Q&A button at the very bottom down there. We want you to use that. We want to make this interactive. We want to get your questions answered. Please feel free to ask those questions. We're also going to be putting in the chat a couple of links to register for additional webinars and the link to the playlist for to be able to see this webinar on demand and to see other webinars on demand. So I think you've got an amazing slide deck that you're going to go through first, Rahul, and then do a demo for us, correct?
That's right. So are you able to see the?
Absolutely.
Perfect. So hello, folks. It's an honor basically to help you guys here to understand what we have done so far in ServiceNow on the financial control side of things. So as you can see here, when we talk about internal controls in a regulated space, predominantly we are looking at IT, operations, and not to forget the financial control set as well. Now, we all know that ServiceNow was driven out of an IT space. We have a foothold to understand what kind of IT landscape needs to be there to run your change management controls, your configuration controls. When we talk about operations, we look at your operational risk from a regional standpoint, how your regional teams are operating, and how those incidents are then aggregated to mature your risk posture. However, we also feel that financial control set, which are born out of your internal controls, which are required for your financial reporting, vis-a-vis an example is about SOX, where you all would have heard about Enron, the collapse which took place a decade before. And the basic reason was material weakness in their accounting principle of misstatement happening due to duplicate invoices, examples like not good bookkeeping principles, and all of that. So what we are looking here is to give you one single view or a page where you can not only look at your IT operations, but your financial control set as well. And with this, we basically connect your first, second, and third line and give one simple transactional screen to manage and monitor the day and tasks which are happening on the application. So it's a struggle for a financial control head to look at the internal controls across their businesses. When you look at a large enterprise, they are dissected into legal entities, functions, departments, spanning across HR, businesses, your tax department, your accounting department, your shared services. And then you would want to run a program to make sure all your businesses are abiding to the controls which have been internally created by your financial processes, right? It's hard to identify the business areas and the control gaps because of the volume of the control set in itself. You're talking about, for a large oil and gas company, around 15,000 controls. For a large bank, about 10 to 12,000 controls, which need to be tested year in and split between different quarters. So the sheer volume in itself becomes cumbersome for an organization to process and manage all of that. And that's why a framework is much more required to streamline that process. Now, a framework can help your financial directors, your head of internal controls, to plan how they want to internally align their control set and basically departmentalize each and every process so that by the end of the year, they can certify that all their controls are compliant and thus move on to the next fiscal and basically redo the process again. So with that, what we have identified is that there is a gap in the market in terms of giving you the right framework. And thus, ServiceNow has come up with their control management framework, which can help build that bridge. So in this slide, we'll talk about how that control management framework can help you identify your control set, operate those controls, scope those controls, monitor them, and then report it on a regular basis. On your right-hand side of the screen, you can see the initial phase of the control maturity model in which you'd want to define your control set. Now, these control sets are born out of your processes, and your financial processes typically are order to purchase, record, invoicing, and all of those processes are basically created as part of a process narrative program where you do your mapping of your processes. And out of those processes, you internally create a control register, which then can be split into ICFRs, which are basically your SOX required controls. And then within that, you can have your key controls and non-key controls. Those key controls then can be further split into manual, automated, automated with ICFR, automated without ICFR. And thus your whole control register is born. Once you identify your control set, you then run an assessment exercise, which is more of a control owner confirmation. In that view, you are engaging your first line to actually do the control owner certification of the controls which are not which don't require heavy resource utilization to do an operating effectiveness or a design effectiveness test. These are majorly the controls which are light in nature, and you typically have evidences stored in them in your central repository to just confirm that the control is effective as it is. So we're talking about those smaller set of controls which don't need rigorous testing. So once that control owner confirmation is done, and let's say 40% of your controls have been attested, you then scope to identify how would you want to phase out the rest 60% of controls which need to be tested every quarter or every year. These can be your access management controls, your segregation of duty controls, your ITGC controls in which you want to identify the applications if you have placed the right access on them or not. So once you scope your controls, you then would run your key financial application system program, where you would want to identify the key financial applications where the data is stored in terms of how that has managed from a previous year constitution to the next fiscal year. In the sense, if there is an application which has changed, you were using Coupa to manage your accounting entries, you have moved from Coupa to Backline. So in that case, with that movement, is your processes being changed over from one financial system to another? And if so, what is the SOX assessment impact on that movement? So it's very important to understand your key financial application landscape. And once you do that, then it becomes easy for you to design your operating and design effectiveness template around those financial applications. And that's where you would engage your testing team to do your rigorous OEDE testing. They will be required to collect samples on those financial applications, and then those samples would help them drive the result for their control test. Now, the journey doesn't stop there. Once your testing team has done it, what we do in ServiceNow is monitor that control using our indicator templates. Now, these indicator templates are run on the system on a frequency basis, which basically means that this is a continuous process, a continuous control monitoring process, which not only can be run on the data in-housed in the platform, in the sense you have your IT ticketing system, you have your common management database, which is CMDB, sitting in ServiceNow. We can run the programs on that and give you the result back. We can also run the control maturity program on external systems like Coupa, Blackline, SAPs of the world, where you have your accounting data sitting, and we can run the program or our indicators there and fetch the result back into our system. And that's here we are talking about the continuous control monitoring on the external data. We also talk about not replacing a system like SAP, but coexisting with them when you talk about control analytics, which basically means that we are planning to move the data from SAP into ServiceNow, and then you can run your analytics program on ServiceNow data itself to give you that intelligence back, whether the control is on a regular basis attested or not. The classic example of this can be change limit. Now, there is a limit identified at Coupa system that whenever a gifting policy is set up, and if there is a breach in a gifting policy, we want to understand that who has authorized that approval, and if the authority person is part of my Active Directory group, then only I would be able to authorize that change. Otherwise, I need to alert the control owner that somebody is trying to mess with that system. So with this example, we can actually rely on Coupa to give us that data inside ServiceNow and run that indicator, which can give us that insight if somebody has actually changed, and if has changed, whether those change logs can tell us if the changed authority is part of the Active Directory. And if it is part of the Active Directory and a part of the approval group, then process that change, otherwise alert the control owner. So that real-time intelligence is only possible when you have a scripted indicator available on ServiceNow, which runs not only on ServiceNow platform, but also on an external system like Coupa. So once the control monitoring is done, the last part in a process becomes your assurance. As part of the assurance, you would want to run the certification exercise, which can be in US 302, 404. 302 precisely happens once in a fiscal year. 404 typically happens on a quarterly basis on your automated control. So we do certifications on the entity basis, where the entity is nothing but the organizations or the entities, where the VPs or the directors of the entity can come to the system and attest their controls, saying all the controls are effective, and if not, there is a plan of action to make those controls who are not effective be effective as we roll over to the next fiscal. So you can manage your certification results into our system by capturing that control set, which are tied back to your organization. So from there on, you can actually report all of that using our out-of-the-box reporting capabilities, and then send out that report to your internal and external auditors for their referencing and evidence collection.
So Rahul, it strikes me that this is a lot of stuff, and the primary value that we're offering is giving people a system, a product to allow them to manage this workflow and step them through the different stages so they don't have to know what to do next. Do you agree, or am I thinking of this wrong?
Absolutely, Larissa. I think you were right on the framework. So all of this is a step-by-step playbook, which is now available on ServiceNow, and a persona-based application where a SOX administrator would be able to do all the 6 operations, versus a control performer would be able to do a couple, a tester would be able to do a couple of things. And that way we are giving them whole playbook experience by providing a role-based access security as well.
Yeah, best practices and guidance. I think that is a huge value here for the ServiceNow product.
So with that, let's zero in from a larger scope of a lifecycle framework to a continuous monitoring framework. I think I have already touched on this subject, how you can define your control and then do the self-assessment scoping, and then operate your controls from a design and operating effectiveness into different phases of testing period, and then monitor the control using our indicator templates, and then at the end, assure your controls by conducting certification exercises or reporting your control compliance posture. So with this whole setup, you can make sure that it's no longer a resource-intensive exercise where you have to allocate resources to do your control testing. Rather, we are moving to a much more automated state of control maturity where the system takes care or does the heavy lifting for you.
And I think also, to that point, there is the system's doing the heavy lifting for you, but you're also getting more near real-time information. So you're not waiting for hours or days or weeks to be able to figure out something went wrong. One of the true value of this, beyond the automation, is the fact that you get more visibility more quickly into changes in your environment.
Absolutely. Now, we tend to forget what controls are, right? Why do we have controls? We have controls to make sure that our facilities are up and running. We have controls to make sure that the vendors and the services provided the vendors are of higher quality. So ServiceNow looks at that entity model and not just focuses on one single departmentalized control set, rather the whole ecosystem of your organization, and then gives you that automation capability to then focus on one such business area and then automate it so that you can actually crawl, walk, and run when you are tackling your business needs. These can be GDPR requirements running on certain processes born out of Europe, or these can be SOC compliance of your US entity. That way you can pick what you need, comply with it on our IRM system, and then move to the next stage. So here we explain how our control lifecycle or the integrated risk management flow works. This diagram is basically to capture that levels of controls starting from the authority document or regulations which you feed into our system. From an IT side point of view, these can be your SOC, NISTs, ISO authority documents or regulations, which can be externally bought in by content providers like UCF, which we integrate with. And once that regulatory bodies are set, you can then break down those regulations into citations or standards, create your own internal policy sets, identify your strategic control objectives, and then system distributes that control objectives into control instances by identifying your entity set. Now, these entities can be, think of entities as a basket, and that basket has group of toys, right? A group of puzzle is one box set, a group of small toys is one basket set. In that case, that group can be your critical business applications, your crown jewels, your departments, your entities, your locations. Now, these different sets can then merge with your control objectives and create one-to-many control instances. So I can look at one ITGC control, which is going to check on my key financial account system to see if there is an unauthorized access. And I'm looking at my crown jewels to protect them. So these crown jewels can be my strategic applications like Oracle, SAP, Salesforce. And I want to make sure that there is no unauthorized access on these systems. Or it can be your data center providers like Azure or AWS. So what the system does is it takes that one control objective, which is unauthorized access, and then automatically creates that 5 control instances. And once those control instances are created, it applies the control indicator which you want to run at a strategic level. These indicators can be checking the people who have access to the system, and if they have access to the system and comparing that with the actual logs, and then reflecting back into the control. If you don't see any unauthorized access, you keep the control as compliant. And as soon as you see an unauthorized access happening on the system with a unique sys ID, you then alert the control owner so that they can take the necessary action to remediate that issue. So all of that is only possible if you have that control hierarchy. Same goes for the risk. If you have your risk frameworks, statements, or themes identified at your strategic level or at your board level, and then you set the tone at the top and then distribute that risk statement into actual risk instances to your regional teams for them to then plan on how they want to mitigate that risk, identify their inherent risks, apply the control environment, and then get the residual risk out of it, based on which then they can drive the risk response tasks, which can be to mitigate that or avoid if the risk appetite threshold is below the, if the residual risk is below than the risk appetite, we can actually avoid that risk and not spend enough resources to mitigate it. So that's the integrated risk management portfolio. And within one single product, you can solve your enterprise risk needs, your operational risk needs, your SOX needs, your compliance needs, and your cyber needs. And that's where this one single platform can be possible and powerful to not only solve one single use case, but apply all the use cases which are there for first line, second, and third line. We talked about how we can accelerate with the ServiceNow offering. Now, this is just a picture to call out what all we have in our IRM and risk, which is basically our risk portfolio, which is constituted of IRM, business continuity, operational resilience, vendor risk, and environmental social governance product in itself. So on the top line, you can see all the solutions which are born out of the Now platform. And at the bottom layer, you can see the single database on top of a multi-instance setup where we have domain separation enabled to secure the content if it is required for your GDPR requirements. And then you can have that domain separation possible on your platform to segregate the data. The Now platform then gives you the capability to orchestrate your workflow, automate it from an evidence collection point of view. We have document intelligence available now to scan your documents for SOC 1, SOC 2 reporting. And then you can actually alert your vendor system that their SOC 1 report has been outdated and they need to give you the latest SOC 1 report. And this whole process is now automated in our system by process flow designers, which can actually read those SOC 1 reports, which are available on our evidence register, and then alert the team members accordingly. So that is our portfolio of risk, which is now ever expanding. In the next release, you might be able to see corporate compliance as one of our use cases, where we will be talking about how we can solve your ethics and conflict of interest use cases. So with that, I think it's a good point for me to jump to the application and actually present how the frameworks looks like in the real time.
That sounds fantastic. Yeah, there's a lot of, as part of the different accelerators or content packs, we have built in a lot of capabilities like indicator templates and test plan templates and things like that. Oh, look at that, at your SOX administrator screen. I see it, it looks great.
Thanks, Joseph. So now a good call out that this SOX management screen is basically something which you can configure yourself, right? This is the landing page of a SOX administrator within your organization. If they're not happy with the dashboard view, what they see here, they can easily go configure their workspace, drag and drop the reports or dashboards which they want to see as soon as they jump on the application. You can clearly see the SOX timeline. We all are aware that for a SOX time frame, which typically starts from April to March, for some of our customers here in Europe, vis-a-vis a customer here in back in US might have the cycle from January till December. So however the cycle is, you can easily configure. The concept remains the same as we had explained in the framework, that you initially do your scoping bit, and then you do your control owner confirmation, and then you phase out your testing as you go forward. So this view explains that timeline. You can expand that timeline to actually see what are the different engagements you are running within that period. You can focus on that phase of testing and see how that phase of testing is going on. You can look at all the engagements. When we talk about engagements, we are looking at those phased testing where the auditor or the SOX administrator is responsible to manage that program. You can track all your SOX tasks which have gone out to your control owners, to your control performers, to your testing team via one single screen. You can capture all the issues which have come out of that control assurance program, and out of those issues which all have escalated to a deficiency that are caused by a material weakness. And all of this is only possible if you have planned your whole SOX program for each of your groups or locations, as we have already discussed. So you can actually cluster multiple organizations and do one SOX planning for them, or you can split your SOX planning and focus it on region by region. In this case, we are taking an example in which we are focusing on per business area and trying to comply all the financial controls against that business area. So in the landing page, you saw the dashboard view. I can, as a group manager or a SOX administrator, can also see all my tasks. And because I manage my team, I can also look at the group tasks in the sense how my control owners are performing, how my regional heads or SOX leads are performing, and can actually manage their tasks, reassign them, delegate them, and all of those capabilities are available. What else I can see on the view as a SOX admin is the tasks. As I said, you can manage your task and your team's task. You can look at the issues overview, how the issues are panning up when you move on from one phase to the year-end phase. And if you want to allocate certain issues to a particular group, assign them, identify those issues, what are the actions taken place to remediate those issues, you can take those constructive decisions via this dashboard. So this gives you that real-time insight which Teresa was talking about. You can also identify the trend analysis quarter by quarter, how your issues are raised, which period can you see the peak of issues where you can then allocate right resources whenever you are planning your SOX exercise. Now, coming to the list report, and this is where the playbook experience comes back to, which we were talking about initially, that how ServiceNow can give you that step-by-step guide in the sense for you to make your process easier. What you see on the screen are the list of entities. As I said, these entities can be classified into different groups. In this case, these entities are departments. You can group your entities as crown jewels, applications for your IT general control testing. You can group your entities as locations if you want to run your GDPR assurance, and so on. For our SOX process flow, we have classified our entities into departments. In this case, you can see all the departments. You can go inside each department and can actually see what kind of entities or control set that department has, which of those controls are being run, how many have been attested, how many are in draft stage, not attested, and so on. And there are a bunch of information available associated to that particular entity. You can see how many issues are running inside that entity, how many policy exceptions that entity has identified, and so on. Moving back using this breadcrumb to our list view, the second important thing is to have your own process register. You can see here that internally, this particular SOX admin has identified their process registers. They have captured their fixed assets, which are born out of record to report. They have identified this particular process is mapped to a particular policy within their authority document chain. You can see the policy history, how that process has changed over a period of time, to which all entities this process applies to, and how many control objectives you want to be adhered as part of this policy. So you can actually run the whole exercise like that through a process information. Once your process map is done, then you identify using that process map what are the controls which are going to be tagged to your process. Again, this is the internal control set, which you would want to curate for your SOX assurance program. Now, this internal control view can be different if you are looking from a SOX exercise or your own internal control register. Let's take an example here, the one which we have for dividends. So what we are saying here is all dividends received from joint ventures, associates and investments are reconciled to approved joint venture dividend proposal, which basically means is, in a nutshell, that we see there are companies who are in brink of bankruptcy, but they are still paying out dividends to their shareholders, which doesn't make sense. And as part of financial control guidelines or accounting principle, if you are not in a healthy state, you can actually stop sending out dividends to your shareholders. It's a pain, but that's a necessity. We have seen companies doing that, and there is a huge penalty associated or assigned to them because of those wrong actions. The reason they are wrong is because that action then stipulates in the market that you are still performing good and your stock prices are always escalated, which is not actually right, and you are not in the right place. So that's a serious issue. And then to subside that issue, you have a control in place to identify if the financial group within your business is not able to sustain dividends, then those dividends should not go out. Now, for that control, I want to run that control against all my entities, which are basically doing the bookkeeping against in my organization. So what I did here is I looked at the control objective. I looked at my entity type, which is that cluster of those entities or organizations. And that cluster or that basket has 9 entities. What my system does is it automatically creates that control set. As we said, it creates those control instances and then assigns those control instances to each of those entities. And then you can look at your control and then run your attestation on those controls. That's where you would basically confirm to the control whether that control is actually working or not from a control owner point of view. Going back to our list view and see, this is all the control sets which the system would auto create as control instances tagged to a particular entity. You can also see the financial account registers which you are maintaining. These financial account registers are then tagged back to your control. Need be a material weakness identified as part of control testing. that material weakness can always go back to the financial control to identify if there is a profit loss rationale behind that. When I say that, I'm talking about a material weakness, which is basically corresponding to a potential loss in your financial account general ledgers. And then you have a compensating control applied to then mitigate that financial loss. So this financial account register then helps you manage all your books. The next framework step in this journey is to then actually execute your self-assessment. And this is where I can, as an admin, engage my control leads or control owners to perform this step. So as an admin, I have a view of all the controls. As you can see here, there are 312 controls in my system, and I want to run a control owner confirmation on that. I can, as an admin, filter out a particular control group. So I can say, I want to focus on Turkey, apply that control set. I can see there are 14 controls which are associated to Turkey, check them and send out for attestations. And then there would be attestations which will then go out to all those control owners automatically. So as an admin, this whole action becomes very easy. In 3 clicks, I was able to send out bulk control attestations to all my first line control owners. Now, from this view of a SOX admin, let's look at the view of a control owner who would then perform this control attestation, or in this case, a control owner confirmation. So I have here Jacob Williams, who is a control owner and representing the first line. Now, from a first line point of view, the control owner would have their own view. As I said, all of this is based on a role-based access control. Jacob here can only see the controls which he or she is responsible to. They can only see their control assessments which are open. They can only see the issues which they have raised as part of their control test, and then the controls which they have exempted and are no longer required to test for this fiscal year. In financial controls group, not every control needs to be tested every year. There are certain automated controls or IT general controls which needs to be only tested once in 3 years, once in 2 years. So you can exempt control on a year-to-year basis. Now, once I have identified my control assessment, I can then take up that control assessment and do that actual control owner confirmation. So here the control owner would come, would view the screen. They will get an email notification with the form link. They don't have to do the steps which I just showed you via their report, but they can directly go through the email, click on the link and do the control owner confirmation. They would see this assessment form. They will say, are you aware of any instances where the control was not operating effectively? That is, was there a deficiency? I will say yes. Then provide the details for the deficiency. If no, then the conditional question goes out, and then I just certify that control to be compliant. Now, this whole template, which you see on the screen, can be configured by you. In our system, we have various configured templates. In the sense, my question can change to, is the control effective? From effective to, it can change to, are you compliant with the control, yes or no? And then I can also pop up an evidence a question where I have to push an evidence as a file to certify that the control is effective. What I'm trying to say here is, based on your business needs, the questionnaires can be templatized on a ServiceNow platform. So in this case, I submit the control and my attestation is done. You can see the real-time change on the state as completed. And if I go back to my control set, the control becomes effective. Now, that is how your control self-assessment exercise takes place. We also saw how you can bulk attest them. We saw the view of a control owner and attesting a control by looking there at their own set of controls and attesting them one by one. So you have both the capabilities to bulk attest and attest as a one single control. Now, once we move from control owner confirmation stage, where we have self-declared the control to be effective, I then move to the key financial application scoping. As this exercise entails to understand where all my financial data is sitting, because we are looking at a financial control exercise in this particular demo, I'll be focusing on the applications where my financial data is sitting. So first, I would have to scope as part of my exercise what all financial applications I'm using. So I kickstart a scoping exercise where I see the key financial applications based out of my process. So here you can see that the system used the CMDB as a reference and then identified the processes which are there in my process register, and then looked at the controls which are related to that process, and then brought that process control mapping. And as part of that mapping, I can actually see what are the identified systems where my data is sitting. In this case, it is sitting in SAP, HANA, or Plasma, and so on. So I would run a scoping exercise right now to understand if the applications which have been identified are correctly addressed, or there is a change in the application. So if there's a change in the application, I will say, yes, the application has changed, and I will confirm what is the new application. Is there any robotic process automation running on that application? If not, I give the rationale behind it. Now, why all of this is required? The answer is to identify if there is a change in the application. And if there is a change in the application, I might have to run a SOX assessment against that application to make sure that it addresses all the basic requirement from an IT general controls perspective. Whether the data at rest is encrypted, data at motion is encrypted, how I'm making sure that the segregation of duties are enabled, and so on. That's why this scoping exercise becomes very crucial. You can always add new processes as your process grows or your application landscape grows. You can always edit by double clicking this field and editing it. In this case, I have opened the view from an admin, which I have secured the right for. But from a IT administrator point of view, you would be able to edit the field and then enable the system. So let's go back. Once the scoping is done, what the system does is it identifies the differential of the application which has been bought new from the previous fiscal to the current fiscal, and then identify and run an assessment program against that new application. So in this case, CashUp is a new system on which I want to then run an assessment exercise. I see that this is a new application. I identify whether there are automated key controls which are going to be run in this application. Otherwise, if it is a manual control, I will choose what kind of manual controls are going to run. If there are system generated reports, then I'll capture what are the reports which are going to take place. What else I will do is I have a workflow associated where I will run the workflow to make sure that the SOX assessment is approved by my reviewers and directors as a group. So here you are basically calling out the group, not just a one single person, and any person in that group can pick up the task and approve it. I can also capture the IT details and identify how many instances are running on this particular financial application, what kind of vendor is supporting that, whether SOC 1, SOC 2 report is available or not, and if there are interfaces associated, what kind of interfaces I'm using to do my integration. And all of this is important because once you have this, then you can only truly identify what are the risks associated to these new applications which you have scoped in. And that's where you then identify the risk associated to that and then do or perform a risk assessment against those financial applications which you have scoped in. So once your financial assessment is done for your new financial applications or change management of those financial applications, you move on to do your SOX scoping, which typically starts from April. You do your phase 1, phase 2, mid-year, and year-end SOX scoping. Now, as part of SOX scoping, what we do is we bucket your SOX into different plans. And these plans can run for a dedicated region. In this case, let's say finance is my business group, and I want to run a SOX assurance against that business group. So what I do is I look at my business group, I look at the engagements which are being run, and I execute those engagements within the application. Another example is this particular planning for OTC group. So in this OTC group, I have tagged 4 engagements to it. Now the system has the intelligence to auto create these engagements for you as part of the flow designer. In this sense, you can have phase 1, phase 2, mid-year or year-end data sets created. And what does that mean truly is that you have now tried to engage your testing team to conduct your phase 1 testing. So if I click on phase 1, what I see here is what are the business unit within my OTC, which are the regions where the OTCs are placed. within my organization, and I want to make sure that there is no unauthorized access on those OTCs. So I look at Istanbul as one of the hubs where I want to run this exercise. What my system does is it automatically pulls the risks and controls associated to that region, and then auto creates that control set, which I would have to run on that particular OTC. So all of this is automated. The system also creates the test plans based on the test templates I have identified for doing an operating effectiveness and a design effectiveness. And then I can choose from these test plans which all I would want to migrate, and then create an audit task to actually test the control sets. For others where I have already the evidences, I can then just skip those control tests and focus on the differential. And that's the power of the system, where you can reduce the resource intensive effort which you typically do. I see there's a question here.
That's right. Let's see. Actually, the question is about having a recording of the session. We absolutely are going to have a recording of the session. I will put that in the chat here very shortly.
Thanks, Teresa. So yeah, coming back to the audit task. So you can see here the audit tasks now are gone out to the actual testing team, who are going to then run the sample-based testing, which we talked about on your operating and design effectiveness. And that's how now we will engage the third persona in our use case, where a control performer or a control test lead would actually test the control from their testing list. Now, this is George, who is the control test lead supervisor, and he manages all the control tests which are coming to their testing team. So here you can see a test which has gone out to them, which is to review the change management policy or review the configuration log document to see if for that particular application, somebody is trying to have an unauthorized access. So you can actually go inside that control test, which is in this case an audit task born out of your phased testing, and they can go ahead and confirm that this is a work in progress state, or you have completed the test as part of that control performance. Within that particular page, you also get to see what kind of design test you're doing, what is the expectation set by the test template, what kind of assessment procedure needs to be run, and you qualify whether the control is effective or not effective. If the design is effective, then you decide whether the control is operating effective or not. Again, if the control is effective and the if the design is not effective and the control is effective, and you try to publish it, the system automatically throws an error saying if you're operating effectively, design is not effective, you cannot be operating effectively. So those kind of validations are in place to protect your testing cycle when your testing teams are actually looking at both design and operating behavior. You can also capture the work notes. You can capture additional documents, settings. In this sense, you can tag that particular test to a particular domain, whether it's an ITGC test or a SOX 3-knot test or a 4-knot test. So you can tag it so that your reporting becomes easier. What else you can do is you can capture your indicator results along with the test you have done. You can raise observations as part of your OEDE testing. These observations can then naturally translate into issues or deficiencies in our issue register or deficiency register. So the process is simple. You get a brand new observation form, and that observation form over a period of time can be identified as a control operating failure or design failure. And then once you triage that with your triaging group, the result of that observation can be that it is confirmed as an existing issue, or then escalated to a deficiency which needs to be fixed before the year-end test. So this was how the testing team would engage and do the actual test. Again, they will be notified via email and then be able to perform the test. So we saw how the scoping is done. Via scoping, you can do phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4 scoping. This was an example to talk about 4 phases. If your organization has a different phase, you can always configure it to have that additional phase applied, and then scope in your controls based on the rules you create in the system. Once your scoping is done, your testing team does the testing, your assurance is done, you can then move on to see how you can continuously monitor that control. Now, this is where the powerful automation in ServiceNow comes in handy, where once your physical test is done by your testing team, how intelligent is the system to then do the automated test? In this case, we are taking an example of Coupa, the Coupa approval chain log. And you can see here, this chain log script is actually looking at the approval limit. And if the approval limit is beyond certain value, then the system alerts the control owner by sending out an email to them that there is a breach of an approval limit, and the person who has authorized it is not part of your Active Directory group. How do you do that? So we have, as Teresa said, we have indicator templates to support that business case. So in this case, the template is looking at the value which is coming from Coupa tables. So we have tables created within our system, which are integrated with Coupa using Integration Hub. The Integration Hub is a REST API based system which can engage with any external system. We have pre-built 200 spokes where the code is already written to get the data out from that external system, push it into a ServiceNow table, and then run your indicators on that. In this case, you can see there is an approval change log table, which has both limit change and the change history, who has changed it. The system then understands the data, consumes it, matches the data with the Active Directory to look at the risk managers group. And if that risk manager user is qualified, then set the value as pass, otherwise set the value as failed, which basically means if the data which is coming out from that external system is not correct, then the execution which would happen on a frequency, in this case daily, would fail, and then these control owner would be alerted via an email. So this was an example of a scripted indicator. We have manual indicators which can run on any particular table. You can specify the supporting data by looking at the table. You can look at the data fields, and you can set a target on your system. And if the target is not achieved, the indicator will automatically fail. So you have various methods to run continuous control assurance on ServiceNow platform.
And I think it's worth mentioning, we know this is an example for Coupa, right? But if you've got another application that you need to pull data in from, we use SAP a lot for our financial reporting. We can integrate with other applications. It doesn't have to be just this one. That's again, the power of the platform is it's very flexible in that instance.
Thanks, Tess. I think that was a good point talking about other systems. So Coupa is something which we have spokes for, similar to SAP, similar to Backline, where we can automatically integrate that. And you can see here the visualization power. Now, as soon as the limit got breached, there are visualizations in place to identify those kind of approval limit changes. You can see the number of approval changes which have happened over a period of time. The system then captures from the chain logs what are the different changes, what are the document IDs, and this becomes the unique reference ID between ServiceNow and Coupa table. And you can actually monitor the users who have actually changed that. And via our KPIs, which we have driven out on Coupa, you can actually capture all the states and issues which have born out of the Coupa because of the continuous changes on their change limit, and the system then automatically creating incident in our ITSM system to then manage that through an IT ticketing flow. You can also see the incident tracking, which I was just talking about, how the system then creates that incidents. And then there was a peak during the onboarding of that application. Then because of on production, there were a lot of multiple changes by the HR team on the limit. That's why there was a peak. And now it has subsidized over last few quarters. You can see the change incidents which have captured as part of Coupa. You can see the different indicators, then showing you that real-time insight on the incident responses which have been taken place on those incidents coming out of Coupa as well. So this real-time detail then gives you the information to do your next step. As I said, you can then capture your issues coming out of our system. These issues then can have their own actions associated. You can have SLAs against those actions. You have your own workflow, which comes with that issue program. You can see an issue getting created, analyzed, responded, reviewed, and then closed once all your actions are mitigated. The issue is tagged back to a control test against which the issue was identified, or the issue can be an ad hoc issue in the system as well. Not all issues are deficiencies, but certainly all deficiencies are issues. These deficiencies are the ones which are led because of material weakness and impacting your financial accounts. So you can actually see all your deficiency list here and then manage the actions associated to that deficiency as well. One of the processes when you hit your year end would be change management exercise, where some of the issues, actions might be to change the control description or change the control attributes. So we have a change management process in which you can go ahead and identify your control objectives or your controls which you would want to change. You can execute the change on the system. In this sense, you can change the description, control attributes, and then run the approval exercise to manage that change management. So all of that is tracked via the system through a change management process. And then once you do that, you get the true RACM, which is your risk and control matrix. You get the entire breakdown of all your risks from processes to the controls, to the control objectives, and the control performance captured in this report. You can always edit the columns, bring back additional attributes which you want from your data set back to your RACM, and then also play around with this report to export into different formats, group the results into different groupings of entities, control owner set, and so on. You also get a control log to manage the changes, what you have done between different phases. So you can see and pick the control creation date, testing date, and see the new and old value. If there are attributes being changed within the controls, you can focus on certain attribute values at looking at, okay, I want to just focus on in scope for SOX. Are there controls which have been scoped in for SOX over the last 1 year? You can then use this report to focus on that particular control set as well. So this framework then helps you conceptualize how your SOX flow should work. And at the end, your certification is something which your enterprise head would run. In this case, this is the certification template, which would a director or a VP of a particular region or a location or an organization within your tree structure or group would then execute on. They provide their statement here, submit, and then the attestation gets completed. And you can see the attestation being done here for the entity group called customer success. So that way your attestations are done and your data is then rolled out into your group financial reporting. And as part of this reporting, you can then filter out your different entities. I can look at my result of Istanbul, Turkey, and focus on that result by geography, how my control are being effective, how many controls are in scope for SOX, how many controls are effective with terms of compliance audit status, what is the different engagements, what are the statuses of those engagements, how many are still in scope status, how many phase testings are completed, and then which phase of testing is pending. I can look at my modified set of controls as well from a SOX assurance point of view. There is an easy view here on change logs as well. You can actually manage what kind of changes have taken place, how many controls were exempted. If I'm a SOX administrator, I want to focus on the exempted controls as well to understand if those control needs to be tested in the next fiscal, how many controls are non-compliant, and then a summary of all your control set in terms of how many were used for self-assessment, how many went through a detailed attestation exercise where OE and DE was identified, and then your scope for the entire SOX audit program. So this visualization is one visualization. As I said, our platform gives you a lot many visualization. If I have to go back to my dashboard view, these are the multiple applications which the system gives you from an IRM perspective, but we are talking about SOX. So I might be using SOX compliance or compliance overview or audit scoping for my visualization needs. And this then brings back to our framework that as ServiceNow platform, we not only support your IT operations, but also your financial controls. And using our workspaces, you can actually get a framework created out of your system, which will then take you from step 1 to step Z, or step A to step Z, and perform that whole assurance exercise. So I'll take a pause. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
That was a fantastic demo. Amazing. People, there's no questions in the question list right now, but people, please, those of you listening, if you have questions, please add a question. We're happy to take them. We want to make sure that we get them answered for you. But that was so complete, and I actually have never seen it from A to Z like that before. So it really showed the flow and how we do help guide people through the different stages, building in best practices. So we're about at time. I don't see any questions. I want to thank you so much, Rahul, for that amazing presentation, that incredible demo. Thank you all for joining us. This recording will be up on the playlist. I have the link in the chat in about 48 hours. And there's a lot of other webinars we have coming up that are just like this. So please feel free to sign up for those. That link is also in the chat. I still don't see any questions, so I'm going to go ahead and close it out. And again, thank you everyone for being here. And again, thank you, Rahul.
Thanks everyone. Thanks, Teresa. Cheers.
Cheers.